Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most deeply complex and honestly most consequential conflicts of the 20th century, the Spanish Civil War. We're going to stick strictly to the facts here, untangling the chronological scope, the opposing factions, and the intense international proxy war that completely defined this era.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Because what started out as a purely domestic military coup against the Second Spanish Republic rapidly transformed into a massive international crisis. For a grueling 989 days, the world watched as Spanish territory literally became the tragic testing ground for the modern weapons and brutal tactics that would soon engulf the entire globe.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the 1936 military coup, the opposing factions, the international proxy war, foreign support, internal divisions, and Guernica, and finally, the Francoist dictatorship. So, kicking things off with Section 1, the 1936 military coup. To really grasp the chronological scope of this war, we have to anchor ourselves in this timeline. Following a period of intense political violence and polarization under the Popular Front government, a military conspiracy was set in motion. On July 17, 1936, a military uprising officially began in the Spanish protectorate of Morocco. Between July 18 and 20, this rebellion rapidly spread to the Spanish peninsula. But, this was only the very beginning of a brutal struggle that wouldn't officially conclude until April 1, 1939.
Now, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the military coup, as a catalyst for a swift overthrow, failed. The government, led by Santiago Casares Quiroga, faced a rebellion that was only successful in about a third of the country. This partial failure essentially split Spain directly down the middle, into two distinct zones, the Republican zone, which remained loyal to the government, and the Nationalist or rebel zone. Because neither side had absolute supremacy, the nation was plunged headfirst into a grueling civil war.
Moving on to Section 2, the opposing factions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how staggeringly diverse each coalition was. It's like a giant, very complicated puzzle. The Republican faction, or the Loyalist side, was centered around the Popular Front government. It included left-wing Republicans, socialists, both Stalinist and non-Stalinist communists, anarchists like the CNT, who were actually seeking a social revolution, and Basque nationalists. On the flip side, the Nationalist faction was organized around the military high command. It united the fascist Falange, conservative monarchists, Carlists, right-wing political groups, and was heavily supported by the Catholic Church.
This quote right here brilliantly illustrates how the conflict was framed ideologically. While the initial military coup wasn't overtly religious, the nationalist side rapidly sacralized the war. Following horrific religious persecution in the Republican zones at the outbreak of the war, nationalist ideologues like José María Peymán framed their fight as a holy crusade. They essentially viewed the military action and the defense of the Catholic faith as a single, unified effort to restore their vision of civilization. Which brings us to Section 3, an international proxy war. So, what did the rest of the world do? Well, the immediate reaction of the major democratic powers was an attempt to contain the fire. The United Kingdom and France led a diplomatic initiative known as the Policy of Non-Intervention. Eventually signed by 27 European nations, the goal of this London-based committee was to completely isolate the Spanish conflict and prevent it from sparking a broader European war. Interestingly enough, while 27 nations signed it, several would immediately go right behind each other's backs to break it. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. This diplomatic isolation inadvertently paved the way for massive foreign intervention. By denying the legitimate Republican government the ability to purchase arms on the open market, the policy of non-intervention created a huge vacuum, and this vacuum was eagerly and immediately filled by the world's rising totalitarian powers, which fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of the war. Let's look closer at that in Section 4, Foreign Support and Volunteers. The nationalist side received vital, continuous Axis support from day one. Adolf Hitler provided Nazi Germany's Condor Legion, delivering advanced fighter planes, bombers, and around 6,000 men who were looking for a friendly, anti-communist government in Spain. Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy dispatched a massive force, the Corpo Truppa Volontarie, totaling up to 40,000 troops, aiming to expand Italian influence across the Mediterranean. On top of that, Portugal's dictatorship offered crucial logistical access through its ports and borders, along with dedicated volunteers. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, vital military aid came from the Soviet Union, which provided massive shipments of weapons and tanks that ended up being decisive in the defense of Madrid. Mexico also offered steadfast support, sending tens of thousands of rifles and providing civilian asylum for refugees. Plus, the Republic was bolstered by the famous international brigades. We're talking about tens of thousands of volunteers from France, the United States, and across Europe who traveled to Spain out of a deep ideological commitment to fight the rise of fascism. You might even recognize the names of some of these volunteers, for sure, like writers George Orwell and Ernest Hemingway.
That takes us to Section 5, Internal Divisions and Guernica. With all these foreign tanks rolling across the landscape and foreign bombers in the sky, we have to ask, how did this huge influx of modern international warfare actually impact the civilians caught in the middle? And how did it affect the fragile unity of the Republican government trying to manage it all? Well, the impact on civilians was tragically unprecedented. Spanish territory became a brutal testing ground for the new armaments that would eventually define World War II. The absolute most infamous example of this was the bombing of the Basque town of Guernica. German bombers from the Condor Legion deliberately targeted the town, utilizing horrific new aerial tactics, specifically designed to spread terror among civilian populations, a tragedy famously immortalized in art by Pablo Picasso. And while facing these unimaginable external horrors, the Republic was simultaneously tearing itself apart internally. A fatal ideological divide existed between the factions fighting for the government. On one side, anarchists, like those in the CNT, believed that a true social revolution had to occur simultaneously with the war effort. But on the other side, the communists of the PCE argued that the absolute priority had to be restoring state order and winning the war first. They viewed the revolution as a dangerous distraction. This deep internal division severely crippled the Republic's ability to present a united front. Finally, Section 6, the Francoist dictatorship. By March of 1939, the internal collapse of the Republic was complete, and it happened in rapid steps. First, Colonel Sigismundo Casado led a coup against the Republican Prime Minister, Juan Negrin, establishing a National Defense Council to negotiate peace. Second, the military units controlled by the communists resisted this coup, leading to bloody street fighting right in Madrid, where they were ultimately defeated. Finally, with the Republic's leadership completely shattered, the remaining forces surrendered to the advancing Nationalists. This total collapse culminated on April 1, 1939, when the Nationalist radio broadcast this final, historic dispatch signed by General Francisco Franco. Today, captive and disarmed the Red Army, the national troops have reached their final military objectives. The war is over. This effectively ended the armed conflict, but, as we know, it was just the beginning of a new, very long era for Spain. Let's zoom out and see how this builds into the broader historical picture. The Spanish Civil War officially ended on April 1, 1939. Just 5 months later, in September 1939, World War II erupted across Europe, unleashing the very tactics and ideologies tested in Spain on a massive global scale. Meanwhile, in Spain, the nationalist victory resulted in the establishment of a dictatorship under Francisco Franco, which would endure for decades, ending only with his death on November 20, 1975. It is just incredible to see how a failed domestic coup spiraled into an international testing ground for totalitarianism, shaping the decades that followed. It leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about: how much of global history is actually written in the proxy wars we choose to ignore? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured breakdown has clarified the complexities of the Spanish Civil War and sparked your curiosity to keep exploring the deep connections of our past. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.